Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sports Speak. I'm your host Tanyon Loose.
I'm your co-host, Spencer Ripchik.
So we're recording this the Monday after the divisional playoff games. So I'm just wondering, Spencer, did you catch any of the games yesterday? Pretty dang good.
Yeah, I caught pretty much all the games, and what that Bills-Chiefs game, as a person from New York, I was kind of devastated to see the Buffalo Bills go down that kind of fashion.
Yeah, I mean it was a great ending. All my roommates were cheering for the Bills, and I was joking around when there was 13 seconds left. I was like, oh, they left too much time left for Patrick Mahomes, never even thinking that there'd be a chance to get a field goal off, and sure enough, he did it. So here we are. It's a great weekend of games, but we're not here to talk NFL. We're here to talk some Penn State sports news. So, as we start off every week, we're going to do our favorite news of the week. So, Spencer, I'm going to let you start us off this time.
All right, well, so my favorite news of the week was women's gymnastics. The Nittany Lions put up 196.25 points, but was 0.25 shy of the Buckeyes. It was Penn State's highest score since 2020, but funny enough, they still lost. Lauren Bridgens led the way for the Penn State, posting a 39.375 score with her best performance coming on the high bars. Cassidy Rushlow also put up numbers with a solid performance on the vault with a score of 9.85. Penn State will host Illinois in a dual meet this weekend, and the Nittany Lions are now 1-1 in the season and last in the Big Ten. But it's really early, so they got a lot of season left.
Yeah. My favorite news is also a sport we haven't talked about yet on the podcast is men's lacrosse news. So they started unranked in the preseason poll. However, technically, if you're looking at the other teams receiving votes, I think they're 25th overall. So they're still getting some recognition out there. Last season kind of seemed like it was a little up and down for them. They went 4-7, so not exactly ideal. But their schedule just looks brutal this year. The Big Ten seems like they're as good as ever. There's a number of top teams there. And their non-conference games, they got Yale, Penn, Cornell, and Vermont, all of whom are ranked in the preseason poll. So it just seems like it's going to be quite the tall mountain to climb for Jeff Tamburoni's squad. So, especially with a lot of production gone from last season, I know Mac O'Keefe was just a dominant college lacrosse player, and he's not here anymore. So we'll see how it goes for them. It's going to be a tough road, but they have a lot of opportunities to get some big wins and pull out an improved season compared to last year.
Yeah, I remember last year from covering the sport that Mac O'Keefe was the powerhouse in the team, but it looks like it might be a younger team this year. A lot of older players gone. Nick Cardiel, defender, he's gone. I know their goalie is also gone. So, yeah, there's a lot of holes in that team that need to be filled with the younger guys, definitely. Keeping it in rec hall, back to my women's gymnastics. There's a big wrestling match this weekend, Penn State versus Michigan, one of the most anticipated wrestling matches. I actually watched my first wrestling match of the year, so I have some thoughts of what I thought from my the wrestling match experience. Roman Bravo Young, I think, looks like a stud. The hype is definitely warranted. He was way faster than his opponent and looked like he won with ease. The Aaron Brooks versus Miles Amin was very close and one of my favorite matches to watch. I feel like that match could have gone either way and should be interesting in the postseason, definitely. Max Dean versus Patrick Brucky also was a nail-biter, but Dean managed to ride his way to victory, which I think should not have been that close, right?
They're both pretty solid wrestlers. I think the 197 pound weight class is really one of the most that's kind of up in the air right now. So, there's a number of guys really like 1 through 10 that are all pretty solid wrestlers. So, it's going to be a good match to keep an eye on kind of going throughout the year.
I also felt like Carter Sarace didn't look as dominant as I thought he would. He's got a lot of hype around him too. But overall, Penn State just dominated, setting up for a big match against Iowa. But, as always, I have some questions prepared for my man Tanyon here, the wrestling expert. So, what match surprised you the most this weekend?
I think there is a couple that surprised me. I'm going to go back to your Aaron Brooks match. I'm going to be honest. I wasn't sure if Aaron Brooks was going to get the win there. Miles Amin is a dang good wrestler. He's an Olympic bronze medalist, and he was coming down from 197 kind of down to 184. So when you do that, you usually have the advantage. You have a little bit of a larger frame, something like that. So I was like, wow, that's going to be a tough task for him to handle. And, Aaron Brooks handled like a champ, and that's why he is the champ, and he is the favorite to kind of repeat 184 there. So that was a little bit of surprise for me. And I'll go back to 125. I think I expected Nick Sirianni to beat Drew Hildebrandt by more. So that was a good sign that he kind of held his own there at 125 against the clear favorite for the national title. And I think that's partially because he kind of came out there with the intention to just not get majored and not give up those bonus points. So he accomplished the goal that he came out there with. I'm not saying he didn't want to win, but sometimes you just got to understand what the scenario is and what your team needs you to do. So I think those are two of my bigger surprises there. I mean, the Bo Bartlett match looked like it could have been a good one, but then ended in a surprising injury, I guess
Could
you
not
could
look
say
at that injury
there.
twice.
So yeah, I mean that was brutal to see on TV. And then it was great. The Brady Berge match. I mean, some people may think that was a surprise, but I'm really high on him. I think he's gonna really kind of insert himself seamlessly back into this lineup and have a real good shot to be an All-American this year.
So what wrestlers do you think still have stuff to prove or pick up the slack?
I'm going to go back to Drew Hildebrand again, like I was talking about a little bit. I mean, he's on the defensive end most of the time against Nick Suriano, and I think there's been he had expectations coming in. I mean, he's a big transfer coming in to a weight class that Penn State really hasn't done super well at in recent years. I know they have Robbie Howard, but he's injured right now. But he hasn't kind of put up some bonus points like some people might expect. I don't think I'm not actually sure off the top of my head how many bonus point wins he has in his time here at Penn State, but he hasn't looked like he is like a top 4 wrestler like he was last year at the NCAA championships. And I think he's going to have plenty of opportunities coming up to improve on that status. There's a number of ranked guys at 125, especially against Iowa. I mean, they have Drake Ayala, who's a little bit inexperienced, and he's coming off a loss against Ohio State. So I think if Drew Hildebrand can go out there and beat Ayala and really show that he's still towards the top of that weight class, that's going to be a big step for him. And then coming back to Bo Bartlett again, I mean, me and my fellow beat partners have talked about him all season. I mean, some people are saying that it's just because he's wrestling up a weight class maybe compared to his natural 141 pounds weight class, but he's just always in close matches, and you just don't want to see that. I mean, it's just not ideal, especially when you go into tournament play in Big Tens, NCAAs, when you're always kind of riding that fine line. All it takes is just one late takedown from someone, or someone gets you on your back, and all of a sudden you're on the loser's side of the bracket, and it's just something that this Penn State team really can't afford when you're going for a national title. So I think they just need him to start winning the matches that he's supposed to by more, and he's been able to hold his own against good opponents, but I think they just want him to just wrestle his potential all around. That's what I would say.
So going to another sport that takes place in Rec Hall, the Penn State men's volleyball season just got underway, and this past weekend the Nittany Lions suffered back-to-back losses in the Big Ten Pac-12 Challenge. So, Tanyon, do you think men's volleyball fans should be worried at the moment?
I'm going to go with a little bit of an ambiguous answer here and say maybe, but it kind of depends on what your mindset of the program is right now, I'd say. I mean, 2 of those games where, the USC game looked like it was pretty brutal for that team. I mean, they lost every single set by like 2 or 3 points. It was like, geez, they were so close, you just couldn't get it done. I mean, almost all the stats are the same when you look at them. They're just really, it just seems like this, I don't know. I'm not sure what the problem was for the team there. I can't say I was up watching the match. But, I mean, when you're that close every time, you got to think that some of your veteran leadership would try to push your team over the edge there. In the UCLA game, not much different. I know that they won the first set and the second went into a tiebreaker past the normal points there. And the last 2 sets, they tailed off a little bit. And I think UCLA doubled up Penn State in blocks. So I'm not sure if that's going to indicate that maybe kind of Penn State's blockers in the front there aren't really performing the way they need to be. But, I mean, I don't know. It kind of depends on, after those early season wins there against the number 6 teams consecutively, once they readjusted their rankings, I don't think if they hadn't gotten those wins, I would say these losses aren't a problem. UCLA is obviously a phenomenal team, and USC is not much farther behind. But, after you get those wins, I think the expectations were raised for this program where they're considered like maybe a legitimate national title contender. And then kind of when you go on those back-to-back losses, I think that's a really serious problem for this team if that's their aspirations is to win an NCAA title.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go shift a little bit south. I'm gonna go. A little bit north actually. I'm gonna say not really. I don't think you should be. I'm looking at the men's volleyball schedule. I'm not seeing not many 2 threats. The Nittany Lions don't play any ranked matches down the road, which is huge unless stuff changes, obviously. But right now they don't. Back-to-back losses is definitely something to worry about. It's the start of the season. You open up with back-to-back wins over a ranked team, like you mentioned earlier, so I think that's a plus. So, as I said, the season is still getting started, so there's a lot of season left to play. Cal Fisher looks to be a bright spot in this Penn State team, leading the squad in kills, and Cole Bogner also looks to be a threat on the offensive end. So I think there's a lot of pluses, so I think you shouldn't be worried at the moment. The season is way too young.
Yeah, I'm not sure if what you said there about not playing any ranked teams will be a strength or benefit for them. It's unfortunate that they're not out on the West Coast where a lot of the good teams are residing here, UCLA, USC, Hawaii, all of them. So, it could be a little bit of a hindrance if they're not playing top-level competition for a little bit. Obviously, I think they're going to be on an easy route to like a conference title. But I mean, like I said, it's just if this team's kind of shifted expectations to we want to compete for an NCAA title, I think that's kind of leave a bitter taste in your mouth coming off those 2 losses there. So I mean, if they can steamroll in conference play and really just kind of beat up on some less talented teams, I think that'll be good going into the NCAA tournament. So I mean, there's a lot of room left for this team to grow, and they got a long season ahead of them. So I mean, it's just kind of up to how this coaching staff handles the team and how the players themselves kind of react to what just happened and how they're going to react from there.
Yeah, the rest of their season gives me very Cincinnati football vibes. Not a lot of ranked opponents, but can stack the wins, maybe sneak in there.
So
something
we'll
like
have to see when they take on the Alabamas of the world, kind of like the USC, UCLA, and Hawaii there at the top of the rankings.
Yeah.
Keeping it indoors, we're going to switch to hockey for a little bit, and we're going to have our second ever guest on the podcast. So please welcome Collegian men's hockey reporter Andrew Destin.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to have you here.
So we're going to ask him some questions about the men's hockey season, starting off with me. Should this season be considered a failure, or was the team just not talented enough coming into the season?
You know, it's a tough question to answer because the season on paper should be considered a failure because they're 5-11 right now, last in the Big Ten. But there were a lot of obstacles they had to overcome, and one of them was just an identity crisis. You know, last year's team really struggled with, senior leadership, things like that, and this year was no different. So last year's team struggled. They had to overcome things like an elongated COVID pause. So last year was kind of like a mulligan season, and then them bouncing back into this year, their senior leadership of guys like Alex Limoges, Tim Doherty, those guys departed from the program. They had to create new senior leadership that kind of didn't really exist. You look at your 2 leading point scorers, Kevin Wall, Connor McEachran, both juniors who in their own right, very talented players, but there's no true senior leader outside of goalie Oscar Audio. And Audio, he's been solid this year in goal, but not outstanding. So to summarize, this season, I wouldn't exactly call it a failure, but I wouldn't call it a success either because there have been some bright spots, but the expectations I don't think were really ever that high for a team that was going up against some great Big Ten Conference teams all year long.
So you referenced the leadership problem there. Do you think there's been other issues with the team that have kind of led to the not-so-great record?
Up until the Wisconsin series, special teams. Penalty killing as well as the power play unit itself have not been strong suits at all for the Nittany Lions, and a couple of players have really struggled with taking penalties. Chase McLean is incredibly talented in the face-off circle and just an overall very solid player. There's a reason he was a 7th-round draft pick by the Nashville Predators. His issue has been taking penalties, and there have been a lot of players like that who really struggle, spending a lot of time inside the box. A couple other players who just really haven't skated at the abilities they're capable of. Xander Lampa is one who stands out. Only 4 points for him, a goal and 3 assists. So there's a couple of guys, biggest problem, though, I would say special teams in general. The inability to stop other teams' power plays and to take advantage of power play chances themselves. Except for this Wisconsin series. They're pretty good in both those fronts there.
Yeah. So that's something you always got to do in hockey. You just got to take care of those when you're man up, man down. Got to be able to come through when you need it.
Yeah.
So looking later out down the road here, how does Penn State stack up against one of the good teams like Ohio State?
Well, it just came out of Guy Godowski's weekly media availability, and the word that came to mind in talking about Ohio State, he used the term grit. And I think that's the thing that could be a serious matchup problem for Penn State is something they've prided themselves on throughout Guy Godowski's tenure here as head coach for the Nittany Lions has been that grit. They do a great job of peppering the other team's goalie with shots on net. They always get a lot of shots on net, and they're a very aggressive, physical team. But having to go against an Ohio State squad that really has surprised people. This Ohio State team, when you think about the Big Ten blue bloods for hockey, what are the teams that come to mind? Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's dropped off this year. Conversely, Ohio State has been excellent. They're a really physical, aggressive team, and I think that's a matchup problem for the Nittany Lions because this year, unlike prior years, they've been a little bit more flash and dash. Certainly was the case last year, so by no means are they not a physical team, but they're not the same caliber of physical squad that they have in prior years, and Ohio State might be the most in the Big Ten.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we did like a little bit of hockey stuff earlier on in our podcast series, kind of, and I mean, Michigan was kind of just like the black hole that took all the attention there.
Yeah.
But I mean, Ohio State has had a great season so far this year, along with some other teams in the Big Ten. So I'm going to kind of round us off here with our last question, kind of like your prediction for the rest of the season. So I'm just wondering, is Penn State destined to finish last in the Big Ten, or do you think they have a chance to move up the standings here?
So there's some flexibility there, and the reality is that, okay, you got 16 games under their belt in Big Ten play. There's 8 left, so no math major, but they're 2/3 through the season, 5-11 in conference play. Remaining on your schedule, you got Ohio State, you got Minnesota, you got Michigan State. You got a couple of tough opponents, Notre Dame as well at their place. So 4 games at home, 4 on the road. Those are 2 teams that are in the top 3 of Big Ten standings, 2 that are in the 4th and 6th spot. So If you asked me, I think 3-5, 4-4 would be a realistic goal to get to. But if you're only at 8 wins or 9 wins, I don't think that's enough to get you out of the bottom. Right now, they're right down there at the bottom with Wisconsin. Those teams are both 5-11. I'd be surprised if Penn State's able to get out of that cellar. If they do, it's not going to be any higher than 6th place, though, because 1 through 5, the Big Ten is pretty darn good. It's really only Wisconsin and Penn State that are the outliers. So I think they could do it. I'm not convinced. If you ask me which one, if I had to choose, it's going to be Penn State and finishing in last place. But it's a tough conference, and to get upward mobility this late in the season is a lot to ask for.
Yeah, it seems like it's been a brutal year. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how things play out when it comes to it. So, yeah, thank you for joining us. It's really enlightened me a lot about the
college
hockey
hockey
team.
sphere.
Absolutely,
Especially
guys.
the Big Ten.
Pleasure. Always down to talk some Big Ten hockey.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, that's all we have for this episode of Sports Speak. We're going to be back with another episode next week.
If you like this podcast, please consider subscribing to the Collegian YouTube channel. Thanks, and have a good rest of your week.